The metallic clang of the food tray sliding through the slot in the door was the only marker of time on death row. For most, it signaled the countdown to the end. For Minho Green, it was just another disruption in his routine, a harsh noise in a world he had spent his entire life trying to organize into silent, predictable patterns. 12 hours remained. Prison warden Piotr Morales, a man whose expression was as hard as the concrete walls around him, stopped before the cell. "Green," he said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to be absorbed by the silence. "Your last meal. The kitchen can prepare whatever you want." Minho didn't look up from the floor, where he was tracing an invisible spiral with his finger, a map to a place only he knew. He was 28 years old, and in the 5 years he had spent there, he never imagined the end would be so indifferent. Convicted of the brutal murder of his neighbor, Sophia Clark, the world had labeled him a monster, an emotionless monster with an empty gaze. No one bothered to understand that his gaze wasn't empty but overflowing, a universe of sensory information he struggled to process every second. Autism wasn't an illness, it was his operating system, and no one there knew how to read his language. "I'm not hungry," Minho replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. I want to see Sam." Piotr Morales frowned. "Sam? My dog," Minho clarified, and for the first time his eyes lifted, meeting the warden's for a fraction of a second. In that brief contact, Piotr didn't see the monster the newspapers described. He saw pure, childlike, terrifying fear. An animal couldn't enter a maximum security prison, let alone on the day of an execution. It was a logistical nightmare, an unprecedented breach of protocol. "That's impossible, Green. Ask for a steak. Anything you want." But Minho shook his head, returning to his spiral on the floor. "Just Sam." The insistence was calm, unwavering, and it bothered Piotr more than any scream or plea. Why a dog? Why this request so simple and at the same time so impossible? He had seen it all in that corridor, men begging for forgiveness, others shouting their innocence, some accepting their fate with a chilling calm. But no one had ever asked for a dog. A quick flashback, not of Minho, but of the trial, cut through the warden's memory. The prosecution painted Minho as a cold, calculating predator. The main evidence, his disturbing calmness at the crime scene. Police found him beside Sophia's body, his hands stained with blood rocking back and forth, behavior the prosecutor called the ritual of a remorseless killer. No one mentioned it was a sensory overload crisis, the only way his brain found to cope with the flashing lights, the screams, the chaos. The detective who led the case, a cynical man named Darius Miller, scoffed in court. "He couldn't even look me in the eye. Guilty as hell." Minho, in fact, remembered that night in fragments. Sophia's door ajar. Gray. Sound of something breaking. He went in, wanting to help. He saw her on the floor. He saw a man fleeing out the back window. He tried to help Sophia, tried to stop the bleeding with his own hands, and that's when his world collapsed. The touch of the blood, the smell, the sound of approaching sirens. He shut down. The man who fled was a shadow in his memory, but there was one detail that stood out. Something shiny, metallic, that fell from his pocket. A small object, with a design on it. But when he tried to explain to the police, the words wouldn't come. Only disjointed sounds and the rhythmic rocking that condemned him. Back in the present, Piotr Morales found himself trapped in that silent exchange. Denying the request felt cruel, unnecessary. Granting it risked his career. What was so special about that dog? He turned to leave, ready to give the standard answer, the bureaucratic no. But Minho's voice stopped him once again. "He needs to know I didn't abandon him." The sentence was so simple, so loaded with pure emotional logic, that it hit Piotr like a punch. It wasn't about Minho saying goodbye to the dog. It was about the dog not feeling abandoned. In that moment, the warden realized that the story he had been told might have missing pages. He looked at the man hunched in the cell, a puzzle no one had bothered to assemble, and made a decision that went against all the rules he had sworn to follow. He picked up the radio. "Prepare visiting room A and call the county. Animal shelter. Tell them to bring a golden retriever named Sam." The order echoed down the corridor, leaving a trail of shock and confusion among the guards. While the world saw him as a soulless monster, Piotr Morales saw, for an instant, just a man whose entire universe fit into the gaze of a dog. Little did he know that by granting this last wish, he wasn't just breaking rules, he was about to crack the state's most sealed case. If you've ever felt like the world didn't understand you know the value of a single look that says, "I see you." Subscribe to the channel because Minho and Sam's story is just beginning, and it will prove to you that the truth sometimes is not found in courtrooms, but in the loyal heart of someone who never doubted you. Camille Taylor tossed Minho Green's case file onto her desk, the thud echoing in her small, cluttered office. She was a public defender, young, idealistic, and overwhelmed, and the Green case was a ghost that haunted her. She had inherited it in the final stages, when appeals had already been denied, and the judicial machinery was already grinding towards its inevitable end. Guilt consumed her. Rereading the transcripts for the 100th time, the injustice leaped off the pages. The prosecution had built its narrative on prejudice, exploiting the fear of the different. Minho didn't act like a grieving or panicking person should. He didn't sob hysterically. He didn't proclaim his innocence with fiery speeches. He simply withdrew, and his silence was interpreted as the coldness of a murderer. The evidence was pathetically circumstantial. He was there. The victim's blood was on his hands because he touched her. No murder weapon was found on him. No real motive was established. The jury convicted him with their eyes, not with the evidence. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Blaze Wright Smith adjusted his tie and smiled at his reflection. He was Sophia Clark's secret boyfriend, a secret she kept because of his violent temper and possessive jealousy. That night, an argument about ending the relationship had gotten out of hand. He pushed her, she fell, hit her head. Panicked, he fled, and fate offered him the perfect scapegoat, the weird neighbor, Minho. Now, Blaze followed the case on TV with sickly satisfaction. He watched the reports painting him as a monster and laughed. Justice being served for poor Sophia. He commented on a social media post, receiving dozens of messages of condolence and support. He absolutely underestimated Minho. To him, Minho wasn't a person, but a convenience, a glitch in the system that worked in his favor. Arrogance blinded him to any possibility of a turnaround. Tension mounted with each passing hour. Camille filed one last request for a stay of execution, citing a small inconsistency she had found. The testimony of an elderly neighbor who mentioned hearing a heated argument before Minho entered the apartment. The testimony had been dismissed at the time as irrelevant. The judge denied the request in under 5 minutes. The system wanted an end to this story. Less than 8 hours remained. On death row, Minho was surprisingly focused. His resilience didn't come from hope, but from acceptance. He was preparing for the end. But upon hearing Sam was on his way, something shifted. A spark of connection to the outside world ignited. He remembered Blay. He remembered his face contorted with rage in the dim light of the apartment. He remembered the strong scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of alcohol. And he remembered the shiny object. A silver bird, he murmured to himself. The bad man dropped a silver bird. He had tried to tell Camille this before, but amidst his anxious state, the words jumbled, and she, like everyone else, hadn't understood. It was too late to try again. The news of the dog's visit reached the media, who treated it with disdain. Killer's last wish, a maneuver for sympathy. Read a TV news headline. The cruelty was relentless. To the world, he was already dead. Then the door to the corridor opened. Warden Piotr Morales entered, followed by an animal shelter attendant holding a leash. At the end of it, a golden retriever with golden fur and eyes full of anxious confusion. Sam. The dog stopped, sniffing the strange, sterile air of the prison. His eyes scanned the corridor until they landed on Minho's cell, and then the world stopped. A low whine escaped his throat, followed by a bark of pure joy and recognition. What Camille Taylor, present to witness that last goodbye, didn't know was that the most crucial piece of that deadly puzzle wasn't in a dusty evidence file, but in the loyal scent of a dog on its way to prison. And the scent he carried would ignite the fuse of an explosion no one expected. Each new humiliation only strengthened something within Minho that his oppressors couldn't see. A silent truth, patiently waiting for the right moment to be heard. That a man. Cell door opened and Sam shot inside like a golden bullet. The reunion was an explosion of contained emotion. Minho fell to his knees and enveloped the dog in a tight hug, burying his face in his soft fur. For the first time in 5 years, he cried. They weren't loud sobs, but silent tears that streamed down his face as he repeated the dog's name over and over. Sam responded with frantic licks, his tail thumping against the metal bunk with a drum-like sound. The guards in the corridor, men, hardened by years of violence and despair, averted their gaze, suddenly uncomfortable as if intruding on a sacred moment. Camille Taylor watched closely, her heart aching. She had come to offer support, but found herself a spectator to a scene of love so pure it seemed out of place in this environment of death. It was then that the unthinkable happened. As Minho and Sam were reunited, one of the guards, a burly officer named Yilmaz Okoye, approached the cell door to say that time was running out. The moment he got within a few yards, Sam stopped licking Minho. His head came up, ears pricked. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. He positioned himself protectively in front of Minho, the fur on his neck bristling, and barked at the guard. Yilmaz flinched back, surprised. "Hey, easy boy, I'm not going to hurt you." But Sam didn't calm down. His nose was on high alert. He ran to Minho's small box of belongings, sniffed the clothes he was wearing the night of the crime, and then barked furiously in the direction of the guard again. Confusion spread through the room. "He's never been aggressive," Minho said, his voice choked with surprise, trying to soothe the dog. Camille's analytical mind began to work at high speed. Dogs don't react like this without reason. A smell. It had to be a smell. "Officer Okoye," she asked, her voice firm, "were you at Sophia Clark's crime scene?" "No, ma'am," he replied, offended. "I was off that week." "Why?" The theory didn't fit. But Minho, who was observing the interaction with a clarity only Sam's presence could provide, pointed, not at the guard, but at the corridor from which he had come. "The smell," he said, the sentence perfectly formed. "The smell of the bad man." Suddenly Camille understood. The dog wasn't reacting to the guard. He was reacting to a smell on the guard. A smell he had picked up from someone else. A smell the dog associated with the trauma of that night. On a local TV program, Blaze Wright Smith was in the middle of an interview. With an expression of false sadness, he spoke about the importance of closure for the community and how Minho's execution would bring peace. "He was a danger to us all," Blaze said, his voice trembling. "Now, Sophia's soul can finally rest." His arrogance was his downfall. To give the interview, he had to go to a TV station that, by chance, was doing a special report from inside the prison complex. He had been there, in the same building, a few hours earlier. He had walked the same corridors. He had crossed paths with the same guards. The hypothesis formed in Camille's mind with lightning speed. He had been here, and he had passed by Officer Okoye. The scent of expensive cologne, the same scent Minho remembered from the night of the crime, had permeated the guard's uniform. And Sam, with his sense of smell millions of times more potent than a human's, made the connection that no one else could. In that instant, a maximum security prison's visiting room transformed into the epicenter of a revelation. It wasn't about the guard. It was about who the guard had encountered. And as Blaze Wright Smith smiled for the cameras, little did he know that a dog had just sniffed out his death sentence. The race against time had begun, and now they didn't just have a theory. They had a witness. A four-legged witness whose testimony was truer than any word spoken in a courtroom. "Director, I need you to postpone the execution." Camille Taylor's voice echoed through Piotr Morales' office, laden with an urgency that made the warden look up from his papers. "Counselor, we've been through this." The governor denied the last clemency request. "It's not clemency, it's evidence." The dog, he reacted to a smell, the smell of the real killer. Camille explained her theory in one breath. Blaze Wright Smith's presence at the prison for the interview, his contact with guard Yilmaz Okoye, Sam's violent reaction. Piotr stared at her, skepticism battling, the doubt that Minho's story had already planted in his mind. It was the most absurd thing he had ever heard, basing a man's life on a dog's bark. But then he remembered Minho's gaze, the purity of that request. He looked at the clock on the wall. 58 minutes remained. A lifetime, making a decision that would define the rest of his career. He picked up the phone. "This is Warden Morales. We have a procedural issue in the execution block. Cancel the procedure until further notice. I repeat, cancel the procedure." On the other end of the line, protest was immediate, but Piotr's order was irrefutable. He had just bought time, precious time. Meanwhile, panic began to set in for Blaze Wright Smith. A notification on his phone informed him that Minho's execution had been postponed indefinitely. Coincidence? He didn't believe in coincidences. Sweat broke out on his forehead. He had always known there was a loose end. The lighter. That damned silver lighter he'd received from his father, with the family eagle engraved on it. He dropped it while fleeing, and luckily the incompetent police never found it. But what if? Fear, a feeling he hadn't felt in years, began to gnaw at him from within. He started throwing clothes into a suitcase. Camille, now with the full support of the warden, acted with the speed of a predator. She called her private investigator, a weary ex-cop tired of the system. "I need a favor, and I need it yesterday. Review the crime scene photos of Sophia Clark. Look for anything metallic, a glint, anything near the back window, and get a search warrant for Blaze Wright Smith's house." The justification? A new witness. "What witness?" the investigator asked. "A golden retriever," she replied, without irony. The execution of the turnaround was spectacular. The investigator, spurred by Camille's urgency, used image enhancement software on the original low-resolution crime scene photos. And there it was, hidden beneath the leaf of a bush, a small point of reflected light. With maximum zoom, the image revealed itself, a silver lighter, and engraved on it unmistakably, the silhouette of an eagle. With this new evidence, a judge on call was woken up in the middle of the night and signed an emergency search warrant. A state police team, not Darius Miller's local force, arrived at Blaze Wright Smith's mansion just as he was loading his suitcase into the trunk of his sports car. The panic on his face when he saw the police cars was the first confession. The mask of the concerned citizen crumbled, revealing the face of a cornered coward. During the search, they found the original velvet box for the lighter at the bottom of a drawer, but the definitive proof came from the kitchen trash. At the bottom, beneath food scraps, was a pair of designer shoes. Blaze thought he had cleaned them well, but modern forensic analysis is relentless. Microscopic traces of blood were found in the seams of the sole, blood that, after a quick DNA test, proved to be Sophia Clark's. The arrest was televised. Blaze Wright Smith, the man who shed crocodile tears for his girlfriend's death, was dragged from his house screaming about his lawyers, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. The news exploded. At the prison, when Warden Morales entered the corridor with a smile he hadn't worn in years, everyone knew. Minho said nothing. He simply knelt and hugged Sam tightly, his body trembling with the weight of a freedom he thought he would never feel again. He looked at Camille, his eyes finally clear and focused, and said two words that summed it all up. "Good boy." The cell that was supposed to be Minho Green's death chamber became the stage for his vindication. Justice, which for years had been blind and deaf, finally found its way, guided not by lawyers or judges, but by the unconditional love between a man and his dog. But as the prison gates prepared to open for Minho, a world that condemned him so quickly would now have to confront its own shame. Freedom was just the first step. The real battle was about to begin. The gates of Westgate State Penitentiary swung open, not to release a body, but to return a man to the world. Minho Green took his first steps into freedom under the blinding glare of camera flashes. Beside him, Sam walked calmly, the leash held in Camille Taylor's hand. The world that awaited him was very different from the one that had imprisoned him. The story of the autistic man saved by his dog became an international sensation, a dark fairy tale with a redemptive ending. Minho received a record-breaking compensation settlement from the state for his wrongful conviction, but he didn't want the money for luxury cars or mansions. He bought a large rural property far from the city's noise and transformed it into Sam's sanctuary, a haven for shelter dogs, especially those considered difficult or unwanted. There, amidst the silence of the trees and the happy barks, he found the peace that human society had never offered him. He rarely spoke in public, but his actions spoke louder than any speech. With Camille as his spokesperson, he became an unexpected symbol in the fight for justice system reform and autism awareness. He didn't need to shout to be heard. His silent story echoed around the world. For the antagonists, justice was both implacable and poetic. Blaze Wright Smith was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In his trial, he showed no remorse, only rage at being caught. His life of privilege evaporated, replaced by a concrete cell identical to the one Minho occupied for 5 years. Isolated, despised by other inmates, and abandoned by his wealthy family who couldn't bear the disgrace, he became the personification of absolute moral failure. Detective Darius Miller, whose prejudice and lazy investigation formed the basis of Minho's conviction, was forced into a shameful retirement. His reputation was destroyed, and he became an example in police training manuals on how not to conduct an investigation. The validation of Minho's triumph came from unexpected sources. Sophia Clark's family, who had previously called for his death, issued a moving public apology. They visited Minho's sanctuary, not to ask for forgiveness, for they knew they didn't deserve it, but to honor their daughter's memory by making a significant donation. In that silent meeting, amidst the dogs running freely, a form of healing began. Warden Piotr Morales was hailed as a hero. His decision to break protocol was seen not as insubordination, but as an act of profound humanity. He implemented new policies at the prison for more compassionate treatment of inmates, proving that a leader's strength lies not in blindly following rules but in knowing when humanity must prevail. Minho Green's story became a powerful moral lesson. It taught the world that a person's worth cannot be measured by their ability to conform to social expectations. Minho's autism, the trait that made him an easy target, was also the source of his salvation. His keen perception of details like the silver bird and his deep, unwavering connection with Sam were the keys that unlocked the lock of his cell. He proved that difference is not a defect, but another way of seeing the world, often with more clarity than those considered normal. Blaze Wright Smith tried to destroy Minho Green, but ended up destroying himself. Minho learned that true justice sometimes comes not from the sound of a judge's gavel, but from the protective growl of a loyal friend. He proved that true revenge is not reciprocating the harm suffered. It is building a better world than his enemies could ever imagine, one bark at a time. If this story of loyalty and improbable justice moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of true connections. Have you ever felt judged for being different? Tell us your story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives where the underestimated prove that true strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just wags its tail.